One of my uncles was a collector of historic firearms and firearm ammunition. He had pistols and rifles and shotguns that went back to the 19th century. He had some of the original rifle shells, casings, that were developed around the time of the Civil War. It was a lifetime of collecting. He was an avid collector of these items, and he kept all of them in the basement of his sprawling home in Pennsylvania. When he reached a certain age, his wife, my Aunt Doris, started to say to him, "You need to sell that stuff in the basement, because you're the only one in the family who knows what's down there. We don't know what's valuable. We don't know how much it's worth. You need to sell that while you're still alive so that you get the value that you put into it." He, being a typical male, said, "We'll get to that eventually." Well, he never did. He died having not sold a single item from the basement. And after his funeral, his wife, my aunt, was faced with the task of not knowing what to do with this rather large collection of historic firearms and firearm ammunition. I don't know that they sell a lot of that on eBay or the Facebook page where you can sell things. She called some of his buddies from the collecting world, men that she had seen my uncle interacting with for decades. They were all of a certain age as well. They were all out of the business, if you will. But they started to give her suggestions. "Oh, for the pistols, you should call so-and-so. For the shotguns, call such and such. For the rifles, you need to call so-and-so, except for the Civil War rifles, you got to call what's-his-name for those." She ended up with a legal pad full of names and phone numbers. Not email addresses, phone numbers. And she looked at that legal pad day after day, and she worried. She worried. What if I call the wrong person? What if I ask the wrong person to sell this valuable collection in the basement, and they decide not to be honest with me? She thought about how easy it would be for whoever she called to say, "Oh, that gun is worth $1,000 when it was really worth $10,000. He could make an arrangement and get most of it in cash and steal from her." She had nightmares about my uncle's collection and being sold and most of the money going to the guy that she called to help her rather than coming back to the family. She didn't know what to do. She kept staring at the legal pad. She kept fretting about things. And finally one day, her son sat her down at the kitchen table, because in that family, all important discussions happen at the kitchen table. And he said to her, "Mom, you have to trust somebody. You have to trust somebody." And so she called somebody and asked him to come and sort through the collection and sell the collection on her behalf. And he did. And he was honest. And everything worked out. But I remember when she told me that story, when her son said to her, "Mom, you have to trust somebody." And my aunt, who's a good Lutheran, said to me, "You'll probably use that line in a sermon someday." And today is the day. We have to trust somebody. This week and next week, in our first readings for daily Mass, we're reading from the book of Genesis. We started in chapter 12 on Monday, and we actually meet two people who have decided to trust somebody. We meet Abraham and Sarah. At first, their names are Abram and Sarai. The Bible says in Genesis chapter 12 that when we meet Abraham and Sarah, they are relatively successful. They have flocks, they have sheep, they have cattle, they have some land and servants. What they don't have is a child. They don't have anyone to pass this wealth on to. They don't have children or grandchildren to enrich them emotionally in their older years. In fact, the Bible says that Abram is 75 years old when we first meet him. They are certainly past the normal age of childbearing, and so they have concluded, Abraham and Sarah, that they will never have a child. They're settled in. Maybe Abraham is thinking about how nice it is to be retired, watching cable news most of the day, and then Jeopardy at night. And it is then that Abraham and Sarah have an encounter with the divine. They have an encounter with God, and God does something quite startling to Abraham and Sarah. God says to these two people who are of a certain age and have reached a certain level of success, God says to them, "Get up, because we're going on an adventure. Get up, we're going to move. You're going to move, and take your flocks and your servants and everything with you, and we're going to go to a land that I'm going to show you, and I'm going to give you that land. Oh, and by the way, your descendants will be more numerous than the stars in the sky." What God does not do is give them a roadmap. This is where we're going to go. This is how we're going to get there. And these are all the wah-wahs on the way so you can have clean bathrooms and a hoagie. God doesn't give them a roadmap. God gives them a promise. Get up and start moving, and these good things will happen. Now, Abram and Sarah could have said, "That's a nice offer, but we're really quite comfortable where we are. Thank you. Maybe you could go to somebody else and make that offer." Abram and Sarah could have said that. They could have said, "What, are you crazy? Look at all the success we've had. We're happy here, and look how old we are. There's nothing more for us to do in life." They could have said, "Do you see how old we are? We can't have children." But Abram and Sarah get up, and they get going. In other words, Abram and Sarah have decided to trust somebody, to trust this God who has made promises to them, promises about land and promises about descendants. They've decided to trust God with their lives and their future. They follow God wherever God leads them. But apparently, very interestingly, and we hear it in today's first reading, people who trust God still have questions for God. See, just asking questions of God is not proof that you don't trust him. Because Abram asks God in today's first reading, all this land that you've shown me is very nice. My sheep are having more sheep. We're doing quite well. But what good is all of this if I don't have a descendant to give it to? Where are these children you keep promising me? And God, in a covenant promise in today's first reading, reiterates the original promise. Your children will be more numerous than the stars in the seashore. The stars in the sky and the sands on the seashore. This will not be the last time that Abraham asks that question. In fact, it's pretty consistent in the book of Genesis. Abraham keeps going along, and at least once a chapter, Abraham says to God, "Hey, what about the kids you keep promising me?" And God will keep repeating the covenant promise. Abraham and Sarah, I told you, children are coming. I told you. And they keep listening, and they keep believing, and apparently they keep trusting. They keep trusting even when God's timing is not their own. How do I know that they keep trusting God? Because they keep following wherever he leads. You don't keep following someone if you don't trust that they're leading you in the right direction. When God says to Abraham and Sarah, let's go this way, they go that way. When God says, I want you to do this, they do that. When God says, I want you to live in this way, they live in that way. Even though they still have that question, what about those kids you promised us? But they keep following God wherever he leads, however he teaches them, however he asks them to live. That's what they do. It's proof that they trust. And Genesis says it was credited to them as righteousness. You gotta trust somebody, which means you gotta follow somebody. As we'd say in South Philly, who you gonna follow?